Hi, everyone. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. And I am coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. The Canadian Foreign Policy Hour is a weekly critical look at Canada's role abroad, and we are at about 110, 105 sessions over the past 2 years or so. There are actually lots of developments in Canadian foreign policy worth discussing this week, so I'm going to get right to it. I hope everyone is doing well. First of all, there's reports about record temperatures in the oceans. I saw a story also about the warmest winter on record in U.S. history. There's a story in the business pages, I'm not sure if it's the Globe or the Financial Post, the National Post business section, about how Canadian banks have twice, almost 3 times as much investment, financing, etc., of fossil fuel companies than U.S. banks or European banks. So Canadian, particularly the big five banks, are heavily invested in fossil fuel, which speaks to how big of a oil extractor Canada is. And of course, Canada's oil is some of the dirtiest in the world and the most carbon emitting. And Canada has one of the highest per capita greenhouse gas emissions in the world. So further fallout from the Brian Mulroney passing. One of the most over-the-top pieces I saw on this was in the Journal de Montréal. Maka Koto, who's a former Bloc, I guess the shadow cabinet, in the Bloc's shadow cabinet. He's a columnist in the Journal de Montréal. He's of, I think, West African background. And he just has this over-the-top piece. One of the lines is, I think the piece starts off, son mandat était marqué par un engagement inébranlable pour les principes de liberté, d'égalité et de respect de la dignité humaine. So he had unbridled support for the principles of liberty, equality, and respect for human dignity. And then, of course, he goes into how he was a friend of Africa and one of the leading determinants in the fight against apartheid in South Africa. Again, this is Brian Mulroney, right? This is Brian Mulroney that we are hearing. There's a very good piece in the Marxist.ca about it goes into more of Brian Mulroney's foreign policy record. I covered a little bit, but this actually piece is substantially more thorough than my piece. And I think Owen Schock has a piece on Canadian dimension that also delves into Mulroney's foreign policy record. Mulroney, again, this is not, I mean, he supported American imperialism all over, sent thousands of Canadian troops to Iraq, a huge Zionist right until, his dying days, was cheerleading the genocide, et cetera, et cetera. But our media has to mythologize this character as this sort of big fighter for liberty, because that, of course, is what Canadian foreign policy history has always been about, is about defending principles of liberty, equality, and respect for human dignity. In Jamaica today, there's a CARICOM-led summit dealing with Haiti. So the Caribbean community, they invited the U.S., France, and Canada. Secretary of State Blinken is there. Canadian Ambassador to the UN, Bob Ray, is there. And this is about the unfolding, how to get a handle on the unfolding crisis. And the very short term of the crisis, of course, is that Ariel Henry went to Kenya to sign an agreement, a security agreement with Kenya that would allow for Kenya to send 1,000 police to oversee a mission foreign mission to Haiti to effectively prop up Ariel Henry. And when he was out of the country, a bunch of gangs or paramilitary groups or groups of young men, whatever you want to exactly call the different groups, basically said he shouldn't return, and that they launched a bunch of attacks, and they created a situation where Henry hasn't been able to return to the country. Apparently, he's in Puerto Rico. And so the situation is spiraling downward. This is, of course, there's a lot of background to this that we've dealt with that I'm not going to get into in depth. But that's the basic situation: is Ariel Henry, who has been appointed as leader of Haiti, is not able to get back into the country. There's reports that the Americans, I've seen reports that the Americans are telling Henry to resign and to accept this transition they're now trying to put forward. I've also seen other stories floating around saying that the Americans are preparing to send troops to bring Henry back. I'm doubtful. There's absolutely zero chance that Henry can survive without U.S. backing. There's absolutely no way he's getting back in the country without the U.S. deciding they want that. I think it's plausible that the Americans have now decided that this is not they tried to prop him up. He was appointed by the U.S. and Canada nearly 3 years ago, and that now it's gone too far. They have to now accept a transition process that they were not accepting. That was kind of what the Montana Accords were back 3 years ago, and there's been some other efforts at a kind of a non-political, a technocratic period of governance for a year to stabilize the country until a point where you could have somewhat legitimate elections take place. The Americans have basically been, and Canada have been, opposing that for multiple years, since that was kind of put on the table. They may now be willing to accept something like that because they have kind of lost control of the situation. Apparently, the gangs or paramilitary groups or groups of young men with weapons, that they are calling for some sort of transitional process that has, I guess, a judge, I think two different figures, a judge and someone else, representing some other sector, and Guy Philippe. So Guy Philippe being the guy who led the paramilitary force that attacked Aristide's government back in 2004. Well, before 2004, he was launching attacks going back into 2001. They actually captured the National Palace. But so Guy Philippe would be part of it. Now that, of course, is a very reactionary, that makes Ariel Henry probably look like a better option. So that's taking a bad situation and making it even worse. But that's what is floating around. I don't believe that the U.S. Canadian governments, that they want Guy Philippe or Cherizet, the so-called barbecue, the most well-known of the gang or paramilitary leaders. I don't think that they want them. Things have spiraled out of control to the point where this is not serving Western interests, even if they have, of course, emboldened and strengthened those figures in the past. Anyways, that's the situation, and it's kind of like Haitian affairs are going to be heavily shaped by the U.S., France, and Canada, and the CARICOM. This is not a good situation. I don't see any positive in this situation, but that is where things are at. The Globe, switching gears, the Globe published a big piece, 2-page spread in the Saturday Globe. Outlaw Oceans Project exposes abuses in China's seafood plants. Researchers documented the country's use of North Korean workers. So this Outlaw Oceans Project is a Washington, D.C. based group that came on my radar a year or so ago I talked about it at the time, where they published a big piece basically saying that there was forced Uyghur labor in the fishing industry in China, and said there was Canadian companies that had, bought fish from these Chinese firms, and were kind of setting the stage to cut relations, cut economic ties, which is happening in a number of sectors with China. The whole Uyghur rights issue has been a big justification for doing that, and they're setting the stage for that. Now it's not a question of forced Uyghur labor, but in fact it's North Korean workers who are the supposedly the ones being used in these Chinese vessels. And I don't doubt that there are North Korean workers. I do, however, see that this is, and I don't doubt that it's exploitative relationship as the story goes into. But I do see this as not about, a newspaper and a project that has, come to realize that the big fishing industry is, profit oriented, exploitative of workers, right? That is, I think, probably in the vast majority of cases the truth. But in this case, it has a geopolitical flavor to it that is about this setting up the stage to de-link from China, and as part of a bigger sort of geopolitical competition. And then today, in the front page of the Globe, they followed that up, the story up with just basically rehashing the story, saying that this needed to be investigated, etc. So they're definitely like setting the stage to sort of pressure. The point of the story was that there hadn't been any cases under Canada's Forced Labor Act that was brought in 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, or not that long ago. I think 2021 maybe it said, and that that was the new angle of the story, and then kind of rehashed what was in the Saturday spread. So the Canada Files published a piece titled "CSIS-loving Chinagate reporters get award from D&D funded organizations." And so Robert Fife and Stephen Chase, who were the main foreign interference reporters of the Globe and Mail, often on the front page, they received the Ross Munro Award from the Conference of Defense Associations, which hosted their big gala summit conference in Ottawa on Thursday and Friday of last week. And so the Globe reporters got it for their investigation on foreign interference. It's not at all surprising to me that the Conference of Defense Associations would support that, because what underlies the whole notion of Chinese interference and foreign interference, or how it's used politically, is basically saying that China is threatening us, therefore we need to either break off economic relations or send more Canadian spy planes and naval vessels to the region, follow the US in their contain China policy. That's clearly how it plays out politically within the Canadian media and political sphere. So the fact that the Conference of Defense Associations, which was established by the Department of National Defense almost a century ago, and has been funded mostly by D&D for the past century, and has tons of ministers and the Governor General participate in their events, that they give this award to reporters who are basically laying the groundwork for a more confrontational policy towards China. That makes total sense to me. Now, on a little parenthesis here, Ross Munro what's kind of funny about this is that he was like a preeminent World War II military propagandist. So he would work for CBC, and at the time, and then during 1942, and he was there on the raid at Dieppe in 42, which is a disastrous raid. And he was then hired by the Wartime Information Board to promote Dieppe, and he actually just lied. He claimed he was with the unit that got the French Canadian unit that got mostly obliterated, which he wasn't. He was there, but not. He was multiple kilometers away from where they landed. And so basically was a propagandist during World War II for the military, and that continued even after. And then he became an important. He became a famed correspondent during World War II, and then had a whole career within the Canadian media sphere. So he's somebody who really highlights the close ties between the military, the media sphere, and the fact that he would be, the Globe and Mail reporters and the Globe and Mail would be celebrating that their reporters received this award named after this military propagandist, funded by an institute that is basically just the military. It all fits that kind of picture of the ongoing close ties between the dominant media and the military. So as I mentioned on the China file, a couple of developments. Globe today had a piece, business section, a front page piece talking about how tourism from China to Canada has completely collapsed. And that's in part because China has refused to list Canada among their sort of priority destinations. And it's like just before the pandemic, it was over 750,000 Chinese that came to Canada each year. And now it's down to under 250,000, I think were the numbers they mentioned. And they don't expect that to change for multiple years, which has significant economic costs. And this is China's response, of course. This is one of China's, using its economic leverage in that sector to basically punish Canada for following the U.S. strategy. The Journal de Montréal on Tuesday published this front page piece titled "Drones Chinois sous surveillance," Chinese drones under surveillance, and it was just all this sort of like scaremonger about Chinese companies operating in Canada, drones. Within that, they quote this person saying, "Le Canada est techniquement en guerre cyber contre la Chine." So Canada's in a cyber war, is technically in a cyber war with China, which is news to me. And anybody who knows how modern war functions, the line between a cyber war and a full-fledged war is not that big of a line to cross. So this is the kind of rhetoric. The Journal de Montréal has taken a really aggressive anti-China spin turn last little bit, really following up on the Globe and Mail, and they're just constantly doing these investigations that are purportedly showing the Chinese menace. One of the ones that they were pushing was this whole Chinese police stations, these community associations that Chinese Canadians, that they were actually police stations for China. And so this week, and that's Journal de Montréal that pushed that hard. This week, those two community associations here in Montreal did formally file their lawsuit, I think for about $5 million for defamation against the RCMP. I mentioned that they began that process a couple of months ago. I went to the press conference, and now they finally have launched that lawsuit. Also, Ottawa confirmed its payment to Spavro, one of the two Michaels that was detained by China. And what basically has gone on there is that he was suing the Canadian government because it appears he passed on intelligence to the other Michael, who was actually working with, unbeknownst to him, who was actually working for Global Affairs Canada's, I forget the acronym, the name, but it's basically Global Affairs Canada's intelligence arm. And they were funneling that intel into the Five Eyes network. And so Spavro basically essentially got hoodwinked. That's how he's framing it. I don't know all these details, by thinking he was just sort of having conversations with a friend or somebody he knew, but who in fact was working for the Global Affairs Canada's intelligence, and basically exposed him to retaliation by China. And so he was suing Canada, and there was a payment settlement come for millions. We don't know the exact sum, I don't think, but it was multiple millions of dollars. Now, the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada had their big conference in Toronto, the biggest mining conference in the world, over last week, at the start of last week, I think over the weekend. And as with last year, the whole China battle played out in that forum as well, right? And so basically, the Canadian government has brought in these really aggressive, quote unquote, national security rules around Chinese investment in companies that have what they're calling now strategic minerals, which is fairly broad in my understanding of the category, what they define as strategic, all the different sort of electric batteries for cars and stuff like that. And so this battle's been going on because a big segment of Canadian mining sector doesn't like this, right? They want to be able to sell to China. They want to have Chinese companies buy them out. They want Chinese companies buy, minority stakes. They want to basically do capless business with Chinese firms of any sort because it, makes money for them, and this is good for their bottom line. And this whole security question, geopolitical question, intervening is disturbing the making profit. And so basically there's been pushback around these national security reviews that the Industry Canada is pursuing on these mining companies over strategic. And so this one company, SRG, who is not particularly well known, they apparently have one mine operating in Guinea. And there's a Chinese company that wanted to buy about a fifth, I think 19% stake in the company. And apparently the Chinese company has like the skills for the how to refine, I believe, graphite, but refine the graphite to make batteries make batteries. And so the Globe business section published a piece titled, this Canadian firm SRG now announced that basically we're gonna re-domicile to, I believe it was to UAE. So they were going to basically become no longer a Canadian company, but I think it was UAE. It may have been Qatar, but one of the two. I think it was UAE, and that was going to basically sidestep these national security rules that the Canadian government had intervened. Now, François-Philippe Champagne, the industry minister, came down hard with a really aggressive announcement and basically test us, was what he said. And we're gonna get you. We're gonna punish you. It's never a good idea to try to sidestep the rules. Something to that effect. Viewed as a very aggressive comment. In the business section, they talk about this being a very aggressive comment, and it worked. The company completely backed off and decided that they weren't going to test Industry Canada's ability to rein them in and to block their ability to redomicile. So the Globe and Mail published this column titled, "Has Canada Gone Too Far in Blocking Mining Investments from China?" And one of the passages in the column says, quote, "Does the Chinese ownership of a fifth of a graphite mining operation in West Africa for the European battery market represent a threat to Canada's national security?" And this is a profit-oriented argument being made here, but it's insane, quite frankly, the idea that a Canadian-based company that operates one single mine in Guinea, West Africa, that is apparently built using this graphite to build batteries for the European market, that whoever owns that has some effect on Canadian national security. But that's how the Canadian government is defining this. And so anyways, there's a whole big geopolitical element here. It's also totally fascinating to see that, so they take this hands-off approach. All these Canadian companies find, they kill people. There's all these killings at Canadian mining companies' operations all over, huge ecological damage. And the minister never steps in and is like, if you don't get your house in order, we're going to boom, we're going to bring down the stick, right? When there's huge ecological or human rights abuses. But when there's a quote unquote national security abuse or potential abuse by the Canadian mining company, then the minister steps in and is all about state power and asserting state authority and whatnot. which speaks to how, again, it's geopolitics and profits, geopolitics and corporate power. That's what shapes Canadian foreign policy, right? It's not human rights, ecological concerns, etc. And you see that play out on this question. So Sweden had the big announcement today. I think the formal joining NATO, and now the Baltic Sea. Baltic Sea is a NATO lake. So expansion of NATO, I don't think is a good thing, but it is what it is. In the short term, at least. The Globe published this piece on Mulroney's legacy in Ukraine. And the more you learn, the more you read about Canada's role in Ukraine, the more you understand the important role, the central role Canada played in pushing this type of anti-Russian Ukrainian nationalism, right? And Canada had its hands in this process even before, as I knew, but this is further detail, even before the Soviet Union broke up. And they talk about, among other things, Mulroney as their sort of nationalist kind of fervor developing in Ukraine. Mulroney takes a trip to Kyiv in '89 and to really sort of stoke this. And so the story goes into a number of other elements to that process. There's a story that broke over the weekend that seems a little bit unclear now, is that the monument to the SS Galicia division, the Ukrainian Nazi-aligned division in Oakville, just outside of Toronto, at a cemetery, it has been removed. And it was initially reported that it has been removed because there was some agreement between the establishment Jewish organizations and the Ukrainian Canadian groups. Now, the National Post just an hour ago, I saw a story saying it's been removed, but it's, as of now, it's just to be like refurbished. So it's a little bit unclear where things are at exactly on this, but it has been removed for the moment, which of course is a good thing. I don't think is a good idea to have monuments to former Nazi troops, even if you buy the Ukrainian nationalist spin of what they actually were doing. I think at the end of the day, they were part of the SS and the Nazi death machine. The Globe published two op-eds this week by their regular columnists who, just Gary Mason, one of them, who's just not, leaving aside the politics, is just not particularly interesting. Anyways, the piece was titled "Want to Provoke Vladimir Putin? Show Weakness." And then another one by Konrad Yakabuski, another not very interesting either, Globe columnist, obviously right wing. And the column is "Macron's Ukraine talk should force NATO to face up to the inevitable." And basically both pieces are saying we got to, enough with take the gloves off, enough with this nice strategy against Putin and Ukraine. And Yakabuski is basically saying that Macron's talk about sending not just French troops that are probably already there in small numbers and quietly, but larger numbers and more active, that we have to face up to that. That's where we have to go. So that's where the Globe is pushing that kind of line. Now, simultaneously, they had a front page piece on Wednesday or Thursday, which kind of gets to some of the grim nature of what's going on, and it seemed very clear that the Russians are actually gaining territory fairly quickly at this point. I mean, not quickly, but compared to how things have been moving, are moving fairly quickly. And they had a piece titled "As Russia Pushes Deeper into Donetsk, Ukrainian munitions morale run low," hinting at what's going on with Russian advances. The Globe business section had a piece titled "Growing in Time of War: How Fairfax Financial Built a Farming Business in Ukraine." And it basically talks about how this Canadian company, a Toronto-based firm, big companies, all kinds of different sectors. It says after the Maidan Revolution, Fairfax began sizing the country up for investment opportunities, quoting the Globe. And they bought in with I think they're mostly working as big Ukrainian oligarch, and they bought big chunks of farming. And in fact, initially the Russian invasion was a problem. Their stocks went down. The sector went down, but it's actually started going up because European Union has taken in Ukrainian agricultural exports they got rid of the tariffs, and that's caused big protests in Poland and among farmers and stuff in Poland and a number of Eastern European countries. But yeah, so Canadian companies seems to have gotten a big stake in the farming sector, and they talk about kind of like the future prospects. If Ukraine joins the European Union, that's going to be a real big boost to Fairfax, according to this Globe business section piece. Melanie Joly was in Saudi Arabia, I think just there. I don't yesterday, a couple of days ago, I think. There was StatsCan January of this year said that Canada exported $135.9 million worth of tanks and armored fighting vehicles to Saudi Arabia. So Canada's armored vehicle sales to Saudi Arabia continue. On Palestine, Jolie is in Israel right now, and she posted to Twitter that her quote solidarity with Israel. And she showed an image meeting with her Israeli counterpart with a big, you could see the background. I didn't see this initially, didn't notice initially, but people pointed out on Twitter. It says, "We won't stop." And there's images of the people who are supposed to be in Gaza, but "we won't stop." The Israelis saying "we won't stop," and that in the image with Canada's foreign minister, just remarkable. And then Jolie has all these tweets. Canada gave $1 million to investigate sexual assault on October 7th, and all these tweets about "we believe Israeli women" and all this sort of justification for genocide kind of rhetoric coming out of Foreign Minister Jolie. So solidarity with Israel as they commit we're at over 31,000 officially dead. It's, of course, much higher than that. There's a famine. There's mass starvation. I mean, I think genocide, I don't even use, I think my plan is to stop using the word genocide and just start referring to it as Israel's Holocaust in Gaza. And we're solidarity with Israel. We go fly there and announce our solidarity with Israel. Just remarkable stuff. This is the Canadian foreign minister. This is Canada under Justin Trudeau. Trudeau spoke with Benny Gantz, who is a member of the War Cabinet. Benny Gantz was in Washington and in the UK, and the idea is that Benny Gantz, who is more popular than Netanyahu, that Biden administration is trying to bolster Benny Gantz to basically either pressure Netanyahu to accede to some of its demands to sort of lessen some of the craziness, or that they just want to get rid of Netanyahu and they want the government to fall and they want Gantz to become the prime minister. But then I know also some say this is all just a sort of like PR. It's all American PR to act like they're trying to lessen the killing, when in fact, if you look at it, they're providing all the weapons and all the different support. And this whole Gantz thing is just a way to act like they don't actually have the leverage they have, but they're going to try to use this other type of leverage that has very little consequence on the horrors that Israel is committing in Gaza. I don't really know, but Trudeau met or spoke with Gantz as part of this whole thing that the Biden administration is pushing. Now, Canada very interesting dynamic on UNRWA, Palestinian Refugee Agency. They and sort of leaked that they were going to end their suspension of funding to UNRWA, and then they seemed to back away from that, and then they finally did that. It's not clear what happened. If International Development Minister Hussein made the move, and then he got kind of pushed. There was a pushback from the PMO's office and other liberals. It's not. I'm not really clear, but anyways, the Canada has ended its suspension of money to UNRWA, which is a good thing. I don't think it's as good a thing as it's kind of presented by some people, but it is a positive. And the CIJA, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, is apparently going to sue over this. They're going to sue the Canadian government for funding the UN agency. And as one person pointed out on Twitter, in response to the CIJA announcing that they were going to potentially sue over this, he said, quote, "You literally have a lobby group for a foreign government suing the Canadian government to try and ensure the UN humanitarian organization providing aid in the region it is committing genocide is defunded in violation of International Court of Justice orders. Definition of malign foreign influence." I obviously agree with it. I mean, CIJA funding, basically suing the Canadian government to enable Israel's genocide and contravention of explicit orders around aid that the ICJ put forward. That is seriously malign foreign influence. We can debate a little bit about the extent to which CIJA is foreign influence. That's an interesting question about how to exactly define that. But they clearly are it's in their name. They clearly self-describe themselves as a lobby organization for Israel. They don't have Canada in their name, of course. So that's on the UNRWA question. Another thing that came out in the kind of positive direction is that lawsuit that was announced. They gave the government, I think, 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I forget what it was. About 3 weeks ago, a month ago, that they were going to sue that the Canadian government was violating its own laws around arms exports to Israel. They have launched that suit, and it's on behalf of a couple of Palestinian Canadians and Palestinians in at least one Palestinian in Gaza. And so we'll see where that suit goes. But it has been filed. Now, this week, there was some serious political battles that took place online and over this real estate. I talked about it a bit last week because the first one was on Sunday in Thornhill outside of Toronto. But there was one in Montreal on Tuesday, and then there was another one in Toronto on Thursday, and I think it's going to, this real estate firm is also going to be in the States either now or in coming days, and they're selling real estate in Israel, and they are now the controversy is that I think to me, to have a real estate fair for Israel, if all the property was in Tel Aviv or the least colonial elements of Israel, that would still be outrageous amidst this genocide. Okay, that would still be outrageous. But of course, they were also selling properties in what the whole world, including the Canadian government, defines as illegal colonies in the West Bank. And so Pivot, which is, I don't know if they still are formally related, but they're the French equivalent to Ricochet online. They got a reporter into the real estate fair at the synagogue here in Montreal. I went there early. It ended up being, I think, the protest went like 4 hours, but it started like 3. And then so Palestinian Youth Group or Montreal Palestine organized a demo at like sort of 3, and then Independent Jewish Voices organized a demo at sort of 6:30. I went for the first part, and it was there's a couple hundred people on both sides. There was lots of Zionists, crazy, crazy, crazy. These like kids that were coming out of Jewish schools that close by, and they were totally fanatical Zionists. Very disturbing to see these like 15, 16-year-olds who are completely indoctrinated into this stuff already. Very, this is talk about child abuse and grooming. There was these protests. Well, people got a reporter inside with a concealed camera, and yeah. So this is what the one summary of this clip. You can see them. I posted on my Twitter. It's a 13-minute kind of thing she got from inside. Want to listen to the sales pitch for properties on illegal settlements on Palestinian land? The promoters guarantee safety for future residents and no land back. A journalist went in the Montreal event with a hidden camera. And so they have lawyers there. She talks to the lawyers who are saying, no, there's no international law. Yeah, nothing to do with international law. No. Israel's not going to be giving this land back. There's no two-state solution is going to lead to this land being taken back. You don't have any concerns. And talks about the tax benefits that come from foreigners. They talk about how they're mostly Anglo communities. These are unsettled. These are colonies, right? These are illegal West Bank colonies. Mostly Anglo communities. So, you're comfortable. You don't have to need to speak Hebrew. You just like, you're in Toronto, you're in Montreal, then you're in the settlement, you're in New York, you whatever. It's all just comfortable kind of stuff. So this talks about this stuff, and it's all open. They don't hide that these are in colonies, and this is allowed. This is allowed in the King government, right? The police don't intervene. This got really heated. Now, at the same time, I should point out that the UN Rights Office repeated what we should have known, but that settlements amount to a war crime. Okay, these are war crimes. This is what the UN is repeating. Now, this Montreal, it was pretty, there was back and forth, there's yelling, there was, let's go fight, this kind of like gesturing, but it didn't really descend into, I didn't see when I was there, and I didn't see any images after of like really intense kind of violence from the Zionists. But in Toronto on Thursday, or on Sunday, and then on Thursday, there actually was violence, and there's all kinds of horrible, these clips, all these horrible things that the Zionists were saying, who were defending this Israel real estate affair at the synagogue, and so a whole bunch of, I talked about last week, the guy with the nail gun. People I'm sure saw that. He got arrested, but I believe there's 4 different Zionists that got arrested on the Thursday thing, including one that got arrested for the police have said hate has been determined to have been a motivating factor following an assault at an Israel-Hamas war demonstration that resulted in a man being charged criminally. So now they're actually, looks like the police are going to charge one of these Zionists with a hate offense. That's to be seen, and I'm sure that the Israel lobby is going to send their lawyers and do everything they can to kibosh that. But that's what seems to come out. Online, there's all these images like these kicking, these horrible things that these Zionists are saying. Really pretty intense political battle over that. Now, this is just part of the uprising, right? The protests, so many different blockades this week of arms companies. There was the March on Ottawa, thousands. It was really bad weather in Ottawa. I didn't go, but I heard report like 5,000 people there in horrible weather. On Friday night here in Montreal, International Women's Day, very Palestine focused, at least 2,000 people. There was during that, or kind of simultaneous to the International Women's Day, the tourism minister, Ferrada, she had a fundraiser, and they had a rally, about 50 people at the fundraiser. They heckled her after. I'll actually show a clip of today. I actually caught up with the tourism minister, and I'll show this clip. So, I have a question. Why are you supporting, Madam Minister Canada? Why are you supporting Palestinians has been asking for you to call for an arms embargo? Why won't you support an arms embargo? That's your riding association, a group in your riding association is calling for you to call for an arms embargo. There's a Holocaust going on, Madam Minister. There's a Holocaust. More than 30,000 slaughtered, starvation, and you're part of a government that has what you've done in response to Israel's Holocaust is to increase weapons sales. Minister, you can't answer a question. Why won't you talk to a journalist? Ask a question. So that was today. Actually, maybe I'll just do this other one. I'll do another one that I did. Genocide. Mr. Gilbo, how do you feel about the genocide? How many Palestinian children have to be killed when you call for an arms embargo? Mr. Gilbo, how many Palestinian children have to be killed? Okay, so it's not about 30,000 Palestinians killed. Mr. Gilbo, it's not about 30,000. How about the ecocide? How about the ecocide taking place? Mr. Gilbo, there's an ecocide. Israel's trying to make it impossible for Palestinians to stop stealing my stuff. You're trafficking, you steal my stuff. What technological damage? What technological damage would Israel have to create for you to call it for an arms embargo? They have killed like 14 children. How do you feel about the genocide? Mr. Gilbo, how do you feel about the genocide? So those were a couple of questioning interruptions of these ministers, and of course those are happening all across the country. We're seeing, honestly, it's a remarkable uprising, right? I've never seen the amount of activism on an international affairs issue now for almost 6 months. All kinds of very good disruptions in Toronto, Vancouver, Winnipeg, many different cities. And the other side, in response to all this, is just ratcheting up, right? Just ratcheting up the propaganda. The National Post on Friday, they had all 4 op-eds were about Israel, women in Israel, and October 7th. Okay, the front page, most of the front page was a picture of Israeli, probably mostly soldiers actually, but women who they're claiming, raped, abused, whatever, and then a whole big full page of this. The National Post announced that they have this new called Israel Channel, and they're explicitly saying it's like a response to all the protests and the disruption of Canada that's happened because of the popular uprising. So they're going to have a whole propaganda outlet just to respond to this new special Israel Channel newsletter. So it is amazing to see the response, the stuff online, the government response, the media, but it's because that people aren't giving up. People are continuing to mobilize. And it's rattling the system. Now, I've gone on way too long here, unfortunately, but I'm going to just go a little bit on the NDP question and the whole bid to Corbynize and the NDP, and specifically in BC. So as everyone knows, about a month ago, I guess now, Selena Robinson did those really racist anti-Palestinian comments. Simultaneously, she intervened to try to get a prof fired. It looks like she actually intervened also at UBC, but at Langara College, and that spiraled, and there was a big campaign, impressive grassroots online, a little bit in-person action as well. campaign that then led to the BC NDP premier dumping her as a cabinet minister. Huge victory for Palestine solidarity. Now, you knew this wasn't gonna, the Israel lobby wasn't gonna let this just pass. Okay. So about a week ago, a poll appears that I see about anti-Semitism in BC and how, I forget the exact numbers, but like 65% of people in BC are concerned with anti-Semitism. That was the kind of like headline that was being pushed. So I start seeing this pushed in a few different places. I right away knew this was almost certainly CJA or Associated Group got a poll. You know, if you ask people, is there a problem with something they're hearing about in the news? They'll probably say yes. And in this case, they'll say, you know, they're concerned. Yes. If you were to list their concerns of where anti-Semitism appeared on the list of 50 most important concerns, I think you would find that most people in BC, it's towards the bottom, if not at the bottom. And I'd even venture to guess that most Jews in BC, at least half of all Jews in BC, wouldn't put it in their top 5 concerns, maybe even top 10 concerns. That, you know, the environment, healthcare, all the other concerns that everyone, you know, generally has. And it's not a very big Jewish community in BC. I think it's like 40,000 or something like that. So we'd be talking a pretty small proportion, I would venture to guess here, of people in BC who thought anti-Semitism was actually like an important concern. Nonetheless, this poll appears trying to frame that there's a lot of concern in BC politics. I knew this was step one, stage one. A couple of days later, Selena Robinson resigns from the NDP. She's now sitting as an independent. And right away, CJA, the Jewish Federation of Vancouver, what do they call it? Rabbinical Association of Vancouver, I think maybe another group, come out with a statement, big concern, anti-Semitism within the NDP, BC NDP government. Selena Robinson has a statement about the horrible anti-Semitism she faced, which is comical. I mean, really, really friggin' comical stuff. It's just like Palestine stuff. One of the examples is from 20 years ago. And anyway, she says, like, it's gotten so much worse since I got there, but she actually has gotten there since that incident. She cites, you know, that she came after that incident. Anyway, just like, it's, you know, clearly Selena Robinson, legitimately in her own head, she believes that standing in solidarity with Palestinians is anti-Jewish. That is a belief. I don't think she's actually lying. I think it's legit. That is what her, you know, she actually believes that. That is, you know, so then of course you get the head of the opposition who comes out. BC opposition says, which I'm sure has all been planned, right? You got the poll, you got Selena Robinson's resignation letter, you got the Jewish Federations and CJA putting out statement. Then you got the opposition candidate, opposition leader coming out with a statement. I'm sure this was all discussed in advance. This was, you know, each piece coming out, rolled it out one by one as part of his campaign. And he says, the letter by Robinson reflects the experience of many in the NDP. This is not a BC problem. It's a not. Oh, sorry. I'm reading the wrong bit here. Sorry. This is the head of the opposition in BC saying, I believe Selena Robinson. I don't need to wait for the outcome of an investigation to prove there is an anti-Semitism problem in Eby's premier office. The only practicing Jew from this NDP government caucus says Eby, the premier, has an anti-Semitism problem. I believe her, full stop. Okay, so that's the opposition. Now, there happens to actually be another Jewish minister in the Eby government. So then they, of course, the NDP trots him out to protect, you know, lessen the blow. So Selena Robinson actually wasn't the only Jewish minister, but apparently she's the only practicing. I guess she's religious and the other guy's not. I don't really know. So this comes out now. Then, as we're spilling into now broader NDP stuff and the whole more of the Corbynizing process, is the Globe publishes, so the former head of the NDP National, the president of the party, Nathan, I forget his name right now, Nathan Rotman or something like that. the Globe public, he tweets out basically supporting Robinson. He tweets out saying, quote, "The letter by Robinson reflects the experience of many in the NEP. This is not a BC problem, it's a national one. It's become more uncomfortable to be Jewish in the party, and that's an understatement. I haven't left the party, but it's certainly leaving me." And so the Globe publishes a piece saying former NDP chief says Jewish members feeling uncomfortable in the party. So this is where it's all going, right? They're trying to set the stage. I mean, this is just a new phase of something that's been going on for a while with attacking NDP on anti-Semitism. But clearly, this is an important line of attack, and it's going to be a more important line of attack in BC against the Abiy government, and it has a spillover into the national discourse. And there are still pro-Zionist elements within the NDP, who are people who have had former high-level positions, mostly Jewish. Let's be clear about that. We're talking about mostly Jewish people, not entirely, but mostly Jewish figures who are, they're Zionists. They're maybe they're liberal Zionists, but they take criticism of Canada's role in enabling a genocide and Canada calling for the NDP calling for an arms embargo and stuff like that. They take that as an attack against Canadian Jews. And I think, you can varying degrees of sort of honesty about it, and I think I actually believe Selena Robinson like I said, I believe that she sees actually as anti-Jew, calling for an arms embargo or calling for Palestinian statehood. She sees that as anti-Jewish. That's how she sees. I think there's varying degrees of exactly where people are at and how honest they're being in their characterization of this stuff as being anti-Semitic, but that is transpiring. I've gone on way too long, and if people have comments and questions, I'm going to try to keep it not too long because I have some parental stuff to do. But if people have comments, questions, go ahead. And Laura, I'm going to make Laura if Laura's here, I'm going to make her a co-host. But I see you, Greg, right away. I'll just go ahead, unmute you, and go ahead, Greg, and I'll try to find Laura.
Oh, thanks, Yves. Yves, I've heard or read reports that the Russians killed 60 French mercenaries, and I'm getting verification from a few places, and a lot of reports, of course, that there were British, American, French special forces on the ground firing the HIMARS and so forth. And again, just today, the Russians took out a HIMAR that was being transported, and they suspect that quite a few American soldiers have been killed. Are you getting any reports of this yourself?
I haven't been following the sort of like nitty-gritty of the war fighting that closely. I'm doubtful that 60 French mercenaries or French citizens or whatever fighting were all taken out at once. I'm kind of skeptical that wouldn't be big enough to be forced into the corporate media. I mean, I think there's no doubt that they're not denying even that there are intelligence officials of the Canadian, American, French, U.S. government on the ground helping the Ukrainian military. I don't think no one's even sort of pretending that's not happening. I mean, they don't talk about it much, but it's definitely happening. And so I think that's pretty solid at a macro level. And then I didn't see the stuff about the HIMAR, but that also I think with a lot of the weapon systems there is a need for the expertise and whatever the people to be on the ground. And I believe that was a big part of the discussion that the German generals that got intercepted, presumably the Russian intelligence intercepted that discussion, where they talked about how the German troops would have to be helping the Ukrainians fire some of those missiles. I forget what's even the name of the German missile. There's a push for them to send, and Scholz seems to be resisting. So I think that the on the ground element is obviously happening. To what extent, I don't know exactly. And yeah.
Okay, thank you, Yves.
Ed, Linda.
Yes, sorry to change the subject, but regarding Haiti, I'm just wondering, the spokespeople here for Haiti in Canada, the people on the left, have always been saying that Haiti wants to solve its own problems and needs to solve its own problems. I'm wondering if they still see it that way, given the violence and the chaotic situation that's going on in the country now.
Yeah, well, that's certainly the people like, Jacques Haiti, Jean Saint-Ville, and like Jemima Pierre, and others that I'm, sort of follow closely. That's certainly their position still. I mean, how I'm seeing this, and the media reports say that people in Haiti want a foreign intervention, and I'm certainly prepared to believe that there's a significant. I don't can't numbers in terms of polls and stuff. It's hard to. Haiti's not a very well polled place, and it's hard to get a grip on some of that stuff. But I'm prepared to believe that a sizable share of the population, particularly in Port-au-Prince, want some sort of foreign security force, because things have gotten quite bad on a security level. Now, I'm also prepared to believe that in the short to medium term, sending let's just say the Kenyan force, as they're sort of constructing it, Kenyan force with troops from Benin and some other Caribbean countries, that could lead to a weakening of some of the gang / paramilitary / young men with guns groups. And that would have a positive in terms of most people's lives and sort of security level, again, particularly in Port-au-Prince. So in that sense, it's sort of like not a bad thing. But the problem here is that what you're doing is reinforcing the central problem in Haiti, which is that Haitians don't actually run things, and that the decisions are made outside of the country. And so a foreign force, even if it had some success in its stated mission, which is to, lessen insecurity, it would be reinforcing the overarching problem in the country, which is foreign control. So I don't know, like, how do you square that, and how do you, to a large extent, things have deteriorated to such a point where the idea of this foreign security apparatus coming in, seems more legitimate and seems more. So that's real. I don't think we should like hide from that as real. But I don't really know what the answer is. But yeah, certainly people like Jacques Haiti and Solidarité Québec Haiti, they are opposed to a foreign force, even though I think they recognize that there are some serious problems of insecurity.
Okay, I think that's it.
Okay. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, Eve. Great session.
Same place, same time next week. Take care.
Bye.